High horology, you immediately assume the Swiss. Well, today we're going to be talking about the German watchmaking of 𝗕𝗨e Sohne on this edition of What's on My Desk. Now, Mark is the one running the show here. I'm merely just a guest on this particular episode because, you know, he is the whiz kid and he knows it all, probably due to his photographic memory. But 𝗕𝗨e Sohne is something that we discussed numerous times over the last few unboxings every time we get one in. Yeah. We talked about the market, how the market has been shifting up. We also talked about facts such as decrease in production, right? And I think that's what's bringing this brand more and more to light is its availability. But before we jump into all that, quick history lesson. This is a brand that was revived?
Yeah, revived in 1994. It was kind of a collaborative project between a few different members of the watchmaking industry, one of them being one of the most pivotal figures, someone often overlooked by the name of Günter Blümlein, who really helped revive IWC, I would say, in the 90s, and also helped with the launch of A.Lange Sohne in 1994, or the relaunch rather. And he was really a crucial and central figure in the relaunch of the brand, along with some others. I mean, what can be said? In terms of the watchmaking itself, the quality of it really is right up there with the finest brands in the industry.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I've said this before on record. I personally feel that the quality of watchmaking of 𝗕𝗨e is superior to that of Patek when it comes to perhaps really a majority of the line.
Yeah.
In terms of what we've seen in innovation from 𝗕𝗨e as well, because Patek has been sort of sticking with oldies but goodies. They've been executing complications the way they've been executing for many, many years, yet you don't see innovation in the likes of the Zeitwerk, for example, right? You don't see any of that from Patek simply because they don't need to.
I think one thing that also distinguishes 𝗕𝗨e from Patek is the fact that there's really no difference between an entry-level model and something that's ultra expensive or super high-end and very complicated, right? You look at a basic kind of Saxonia versus, you know, maybe a split-second perpetual calendar, they're going to be finished to the same excruciating detail. And you can't really say that the same, generally speaking, from Patek Philippe, right? An entry-level Calatrava won't be finished to the same extensive degree like a perpetual calendar chronograph.
Nor will any of the sports models, i.e. Nautiluses,
right,
etc.
For sure. And that's really, I think, what helps distinguish 𝗕𝗨e from Patek Philippe, from even your AP. We saw, for example, the release of the super complicated AP codes, and those are finished to an exceptional level, but you really can't say the same for the most part, you know, let's say for the movement of a Royal Oak or a Code 1159, which seems a little bit more industrial. Something like this is, you know, purely hand finished, and it's really a testament to the quality. Once you see these in person, it's really breathtaking.
One may argue to say, okay, well, then the price point then therefore is not there, but it is. If you look at the entry-level prices for both Patek or Audemars, as you mentioned it, you know, they are not exactly in the affordable range, if you will, where same goes for 𝗕𝗨e, if you will. You know, their entry-level prices are in line with the big boys, i.e. your Patek Philippe's, your Audemars Piguet, your Vacherons, and things of that nature. Majority of their line up until recent has all been done in precious metals. They never went the stainless steel route. Yep. In fact, we just saw the introduction of the Odysseus a couple of years ago in the stainless steel version, just one watch, right?
Yep.
And 𝗕𝗨e came out of the gate swinging, right? Their entry into the market models were the 𝗕𝗨e one, it was the Saxonia, and it was the 𝗕𝗏𝗏, which we have here.
And lest we forget also the Pour le Mérite tourbillon, which was, you know, one of the most innovative watches for the time, not only combining a tourbillon but also a chain and fusée, which is rarely done, and also actually was done in collaboration with Renaud and Papy, watch brand that we talked.
Renaud and Papy has their hand in pretty much everything. When you're going back to the 90s, and it's almost hard to pick a watch out, or a substantial watch of substantial complication, I should say, to you know, not to have Renaud and Papy fingerprint somewhere, I feel like.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think if you look at even, for example, some of the upstart models, right? Think of, for example, a 𝗕𝗨e one. Compare that to, let's say, an entry-level Calatrava from Patek Philippe. And I told you this earlier, right? We've seen dress watches done before. You know, even 𝗕𝗨e will make are very well known for their chronographs, for example, like a datograph, which we'll get into. But there's a lot of great chronographs, there's a lot of great calendar watches that we see here on the table. But in terms of design, there's nothing like a 𝗕𝗨e one, right? It has that perfect balance, what we call the golden ratio. That's essentially what it's based off of. And that watch,
you can draw a triangle on the dial.
Equilateral triangle on the dial itself, which creates that golden ratio for the Lange one. And the design to me is simple and just beautiful. I mean,
the only other watch that mimics that would be 𝗕𝗰𝗲𝗬𝗢.
Yeah, which, they're actually part of Lange. They're kind of, there is an intertwined history there that 𝗕𝗰𝗲𝗬𝗢 ended up breaking off from the Lange brand and started their own brand. So there is kind of that intertwined history, although Lange was technically the original.
Well, if you look at the design, and I think what you were trying to say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's just some watches out there, like a Royal Oak, that's unmistakably Royal Oak. And Lange is one of those watches. There are plenty of watch brands out there, to include Patek, to include Vacheron, to include some of the dressier stuff from Audemars Piguet, where from afar it could be a Vacheron, it could be, but for a Lange, there's no other watch out there that from afar can say, oh, that may be something else. It's this distinct design of the Lange 1 that always made it so appealing to me personally as a watch. Another thing they did was large size watches, right? You're looking at dress watches upwards of 42 millimeters, like the Grand Lange one, like this one we have in platinum, for example. Yep. At that time, bigger was better. That's when the offshores were starting to pick up steam. That's when a lot of the bigger stuff started picking up steam. And Lange said, you know what? We're going to keep up with the times. Yes, they have their fair share of 36 millimeter pieces, 38 millimeter pieces, 40, but they weren't afraid to go big or go home, so to speak. And speaking of big, I hate to jump over the Datograph, because I know it's one of the most iconic watches they have here, but since we're talking about size, I want to talk about the Zeitwerk. One of my absolute favorite complications from Lange, and I'm going to let you take the reins on the complication side of things, because what a lot of people tend to overlook is they say, oh wow, it's a digital watch display, what's the big deal?
First of all, to create a digital display watch of the like of a Zeitwerk, you have to factor into consideration what it takes to flick those numerals in the minutes, the tens of minutes, the hours, and then to do that all simultaneously at the change of the hour, right? That requires a lot of power to be able to do that. And that kind of power ultimately affects the timekeeping of the watch, because that amplitude is taken away from the actual,
like any other watch, be it a chronograph, be it a regular jump hour, if you will. But this is basically a jump hour on steroids, because you're jumping the minutes, the tenths of minutes, you're jumping the hour at the same time.
And it's all simultaneously, right? So to control that power, Lange was looking for a way that they can do that. And what they essentially designed with this was a spring remotoir to control the numeral change. Now, spring remotoirs are actually very rarely used in watchmaking. They date back to the 1400s in clock towers. And they're
I remember I was around that.
They use a lot of the brands that use them today are the likes of 𝗵𝗵𝗄𝗏, the Groeneveld brothers have a remotoir watch, but they use it specifically in here to control the change in numerals. And essentially, what a remotoir does is the constant force device, right? So essentially, what you have is imbalances in power over the watches. When a mainspring is wound, there's an imbalance of power from the time it's fully wound to the time it's minimally wound. And so what a remotoir does is it equalizes that power over the course of the watch's power reserve. Now, in this case, Lange used it in a very ingenious way to essentially control the power necessary in the numeral changes. So to even just conceptualize that, that's a feat in its own right.
I think when they came up with the design of this watch, they first designed it and then they try to figure out how to get it to work, I feel like. I don't think the remotoir was like, okay, we're just going to take that, put a remotoir in, and that's how it's going to work.
No, that's usually how it ends up, especially in a project like this, right? If you're going to conceptualize a digital display watch, you're going to have to first come up with kind of a design what you're looking to get out of it, and then secondly, design the movement kind of around it. And again, it can be understated just how difficult it is to conceptualize something like that and to achieve it in a format that I feel is a very clean aesthetic, right?
And if we're going to talk retail pricing, right, remotoir or something like this is right up there with a tourbillon watch, a two-axis tourbillon, if you will, but yet the price point that they came out this with was actually very approachable. Majority of the Zeitwerks were retailing around that $100,000 price range. Most of them trade under $100,000 on the secondary market, and to think that you're getting something that's, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, more complicated than a standard tourbillon.
Yeah, in recent years, you've also seen the prices of these creep up, right? These used to trade in the $50,000-ish range, let's say, in white gold, and rose was always a little bit softer than the white metal. The platinum and the chiming hours being, trading at a premium.
Speaking of, we don't have a chime. There's a Zeitwerk chiming hours, right? Yeah. Imagine how much more power that takes. And I'm going to dumb it down for a second based on what Marco has said. But in reality, if you can imagine a car going down a straight road and you have your pedal on the gas, right? And you're moving at a constant speed of, let's say, 50 miles an hour, 20 miles, it's irrelevant, right? You're moving at a constant speed and all of a sudden you see the car needs to go uphill, right?
Yeah.
What is that at that very moment, to keep that constant speed to be going exactly 50 miles an hour, you're literally going to have to step on the gas a little more, or alternatively, you would engage the cruise control, i.e. the remontoire in that watch, to give the car more power in order to keep that consistent speed. And that's what that remontoire does inside that watch in order to keep seemingly like just a cool but whatever functionality, i.e. digital display going. It is a lot more complicated than it turns out to be. And that's why that's probably one of my favorite complications. But I know you itching to talk about the data graph because that's one of your favorites. What do we have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, just to finish up on the Zeitwerk, in terms of pricing, we've seen the supply of these actually kind of shore up, especially in recent years, right? People are starting to appreciate, and also it's not easy for Lange to make a complication like this in huge quantities, right? We already talked about them cutting production. These went from around the 50,000 range to now the 80,000 plus. So I think in terms of specialness, in terms of the watchmaking inside of it, it's
I'm going to talk about the market in general in just a moment, but I do want to get through some of the key complications, some of the key models that we have here, and let's talk about the data graph.
Data graph is definitely one of them. I think it's probably, it's the standard bearer for all manual wind in-house chronographs, right? I think you can't talk about the data graph without going back to 1998 when Patek released the 5070. At the time, it was very standard for the watch industry to use what we call off-the-shelf movements, right? Things like the 𝗲𝗎 movement, Valjoux 7750 was, very widely used. These are workhorse, movements that were used by multiple brands, and they were the standard bearers for their time, right?
Yeah, they worked.
Right, they were extremely reliable. Everybody used them, and that's just what people were accustomed to. And so,
𝗲𝗎 or A.Lange for you?
I mean, 𝗲𝗎 is definitely much more prestigious, no doubt about it. So when the data graph was released in 1999, it really took the Swiss watch industry by storm, because here was a German upstart brand only about, less than 5 years into the business at that point, and they were creating from the top down, an in-house manual wind chronograph movement that hadn't been done in over 40 years, right? And so that just kind of blew away the Swiss watch industry.
I think it ruffled the feathers a little bit, like, oh my God, now we got to do something about this, because here we are all of a sudden, here's a brand that says, you know what, I'm not going to use the standard movements that are already out there. They've been working for years at that point, and I'm just going to make my own. I
mean, you take into consideration that Patek only made the first in-house chronograph movement in the 5980. I think that was released in 2008, I want to say. And then after that, the first manual wind chronograph was the 5170, which was released around the 2010s, right? So about 10 years, essentially, before Patek actually released their own in-house chronograph movement. And it was essentially, to a certain degree, a modified version of the original 𝗲𝗎-based movement. So, I mean, it's just a testament, again, to the quality of A.Lange Sohne. Not only is the finishing, the movement architecture on another level from other manual wind chronographs, but the fact that they are still the standard bearer to this day, and this is a movement now that's almost 25 years old, is just a testament to the ingenuity of A.Lange Sohne.
And I'm going to come back to you on specifically some of the finishes on these watches, if you want to quickly go through, because I know you said that the watches are finished to a highest quality, but let's give me a few details on the finishing on some of these.
Yeah, I mean, something like this is going to have the range of finishing, right? So from the perlage on the base plate, for example, the beveling on the actual bridges themselves. But one thing that distinguishes Lange watches is their balance cock engravings. And I always love to watch that and see that. And what's actually cool is you can actually bring that watch into Lange, into their manufacturer, and they have the specific engravers, each of which will have their own kind of design cues, and they could put it under a microscope, and you actually know which artisan made that specific engraving on the balance cock. So
I wish they did what our friend Max at MB&F did and actually put their engraver's name on there, but
I mean, that would be great. I think at the same time, it's nice to have that kind of if you know, you know, and have that, if you will, like that fun trip to go out to Saxony and be able to find out who actually made your watch. But that, again, it's just a testament to the quality of Lange, right? That's not something that you'll see from Patek Philippe. It's not something even you'll see from Vacheron or Breguet or, you know, any of these high-end Swiss watch brands.
So I know one of the things you guys like to often hear about is market, right? And that's one of the things that we've really discussed and openly discussed in order to give you enough information so that you are able to make a purchase decision should you be buying a Lange or an Omega or anything else for that nature. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk about what Marco briefly touched upon, i.e., hey, the Zeitwerk used to be at 50,000, now it's creeping up to 80 plus, right? The strike in time, you could pick up under 100,000 today, you're paying well into the 120s, right? Here's what's happened, right? And I've said this before, perhaps on one of the unboxings of some previous videos, but Richemont Group, big badass Richemont Group, started taking a look around the last few years, and what are they seeing? They're seeing Francois, what he did with Audemars Piguet when everybody laughed at him. Literally, when Francois said, I'm going to cut out dealers, I am going to reduce production numbers, I am going to raise retail prices, and I'm going to start selling this stuff out of the boutique, and everybody laughed because they said, wait a minute, the ADs will undercut you, and so will the gray market. How are you going to do this? And lo and behold, a few years later, here we are, where a majority of APs that are made out are trading over list and possible to get waiting list, right?
Yep.
Who else followed suit really, really well behind it was Richard Mille, another newcomer, right? A brand that's only 22 years old at this point.
Yep. 𝗕𝗄𝗄 was another one.
𝗕𝗄𝗄 was the next one. I mean, 𝗕𝗄𝗄 had a little bit of help from our friends over at Watchbox, and they recognize a niche market and a brand and it's well-deserved, right? And all of a sudden, the Richemont Group, somewhere, I guess, in the board meeting, somebody said, what the hell is going on? We're the big, badass Richemont Group. Why don't we have an AP or Richard Mille or an 𝗕𝗄𝗄, right, for that matter? And the logical choice, and again, this is me giving you my opinion. I was not in that boardroom, nor am I privy to any of that meeting. So guys, don't start commenting that I know all this stuff, right? But this is just common sense. And somewhere, somehow, somebody said, we need to pick a flagship brand, if you will, that we can do the same with. And the obvious choice was Lange. I think, listen, they have plenty of great brands in that lineup. Don't get me wrong. No, I love Jaeger. I love Panerai. In fact, I don't think I can think of a brand. My second favorite brand from them, believe it or not, is actually going to be Rouge Dubuis. But
over VC? Fair enough.
It's just a more modern look. Again, not the topic of the conversation. So they took Lange, and they said, you know what? We're going to take production down from, officially production numbers for Lange were around that $5,000, $5,500. And I say that maybe due to some limited editions, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say if it was $5,500, they took it down officially, you can look this up, to 2,000 units a year. That's a drastic cut in production. That's, when you're cutting a production to more than half, that's a completely, very, very drastic production cut. With that said, they also went the application route. There are plenty of pieces from Lange. If you decide tomorrow to go into a Lange boutique and pick up a Zeitwerk, they're going to ask you what your purchase history is. They're going to require you most likely to buy a few other basic entry-level pieces or get on a long waiting list. Now, how real that waiting list is, we don't know. Maybe it's not so real, but it is there, that we know, right? And they didn't do anything that Francois didn't do. Everybody followed Francois' footsteps, if you will. Francois, sort of pioneered that whole entire situation. Fair to say that we can go back to Patek and their application pieces, but I feel like that's a different animal. When you get into Patek and their high-end complications, your minute repeaters, your tourbillons, that was always a thing. It was always an approval process. There was always history involved, purchase history.
But even above and beyond just the application pieces, you see Lange more and more, and you could say this about all Richemont brands, but Lange specifically going more and more the boutique route.
Right.
Because they're
following suit of what has already been done, what has already worked. Are they going to be too late to the party? I don't know, but so far this is what I'm seeing as far as the market is concerned.
But I think also a big game changer was this watch right here, the Odysseus, right? Having that high horology sports watch, which Lange was missing, that had a popularity on the secondary market that traded over retail, and that could be a piece that they can use as leverage for selling, let's say, something that isn't so popular, your Saxonia calendars, for example, was a game changer for them, a complete and utter game changer. Because now you had a watch that was mass appealing, that allowed them to gain
I'll make it simpler. It drew attention to the brand.
Correct, exactly.
Oh my God, here's a watch that resells. The stainless steel Odysseus traded at double. I think it still does, more or less. So that draws a lot of attention. It's a page out of, again, the book of Francois. What he has done, starting with being the CEO of North Americas and then moving on to being a global CEO, and now unfortunately retiring, I believe, at the top, right? I think that everybody sort of follows suit, because in the industry of watches, there's lots of copying going on. And it's not just when it comes to watch design or functionality, it's when it comes to certain moves. And Francois made the move that everybody initially laughed at. Very similar to when Richard Mille decided to raise prices in one year by like 40%, and everybody laughed at him. And that's when it the brand kind of took off, because it drew a lot of attention, which is the key point you're trying to make. Yeah,
no doubt. I think also what makes Lange a little bit unique than, say, for example, your Patek Philippe or your AP, is the fact that they appeal, at least in my personal opinion, to a different watch collecting demographic. The Lange customer, what I've noticed is a lot of the same customers that are into your 𝗵𝗕𝗄𝗯𝗔𝗧𝗔𝗐, into your 𝗏𝗏𝗏 fells, your high horology independent.
This does have that independent vibe.
Exactly. They're serially produced.
Or the quality of, I should
Correct.
say.
So they're made in a smaller scale. They're made to an excruciatingly high level, arguably the highest level, in the watch industry in comparison to other serially producing manufacturers, the likes of Patek, etc. And at the same time, they're making complications, things like, the Lange 31-day power reserve, split-second perpetual calendars, chiming watches.
Guys, hold on a second. Let's talk about their double split.
Yeah,
and then they followed up with a triple split.
Yep.
I mean, the chronograph tends to be downplayed as a complication, but me and you both know the chronograph is one of the most complicated complications out there to execute properly, right?
Yeah.
Which I believe that they've done a great job with the datograph, right? There's a reason why companies like Patek and many others were using 𝗏𝗏𝗎 as a workhorse, were using the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 as a workhorse, because a good chronograph is not very easy to execute, again, due to loss of amplitude, like as we discussed earlier. But the double split, where it split the seconds and the minutes, seemingly a useless complication. The triple split, that split the hours, the minutes, and the seconds, right? Seemingly, again, a useless complication. But if you think about it, in reality, majority of the complications that in mechanical watches today are useless, because majority of this stuff is in here anyway. You're not going to get a more accurate stopwatch than in your iPhone.
Not to mention also Lange assembles and disassembles these movements for the most part multiple times before they leave the manufacturer.
So now it's a horological flex, as I like to call it. And for those that understand, they understand. I've sold numerous double splits and a few triple splits to clients that were completely baffled by the fact that complication even exists. And if you go out to the big boys, your APs, who started their roots in highly complicated movements, right? You go out to the Patek Philippe's, they don't have it.
Or they're starting to make it. Like you saw AP with the new code release. Now they're understanding, like, listen, we have to be there.
I feel like they're lining themselves up. I said it on record a couple of months ago in a video where I said, listen, I believe the independence of the future. I believe that current independent watchmakers are going to be your Paul Newman Daytonas 50 years from now in auction. And the big boys are starting to understand that as well. And they're starting to understand that it's not just about the name that they already have and models that are already, on fire, i.e. your Royal Oak, Nautiluses, et cetera, et cetera. It's also about going back to the basics and showing people, hey, listen, we can also flex horologically, if you will, right?
No doubt about it. And you see a lot of what Lange's success is tied into is having some, what we call the blank cabinets, right? AP has the Royal Oak, for example. Patek has, a number of different models, be it the Nautilus, be it their perpetual calendar chronographs. Essentially, Lange has a lot of really good models, the Datograph being one of them, the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 also. I think the Lange one is probably their greatest designed watch, right? Because there's so many different examples of them. We have a few on the table on bracelet, in platinum, in white.
Well, I'm gonna say in terms of design, my favorite is going to be the Lange 1 time zone, i.e. their world time. I think, world time watches in general, if you look across any brand, they tend to be super busy. And that's due to all the different cities and stuff like that. And a lot of times, I've seen some watch companies sort of scale that down to just a few cities or some sort of a window where the cities show up with the help of turning the bezel, et cetera. Lange managed to get all that functionality to include all the cities and the AM, PM indicator and all that stuff onto a watch. And they did it so well that the watch, that's the only world time I can think of that's not busy. That actually displays all the cities in the different time zones.
No doubt. And they've even gone as far as to make Lange 1 perpetual calendars now at this point. So I think what Lange is achieving is, one, an ability to reach a mass market, two, gain appreciation for the quality and ingenuity of their watches, and then three, at the same time, also have a perfect supply-demand formula, or they're achieving a perfect supply-demand formula, because with that cut in production, which you pretty much never see, right? Most brands, AP for example, wanted to go from 40,000, now they want to go to 50,000 watches, right? Lange cutting production, in my opinion, is a complete game changer for them. Because
well, then let me put some numbers behind that, right?
Sure.
So I've been trading Lange watches pretty much since I started in the industry, and let me tell you, Lange has always been that brand that you can get out there. Get it from an AD at a discount, and let's say if this is get it at 35 off from the dealer and sell it 30 off to the public. This has been going on for quite a few years. That was the norm, not just for Lange, that was the norm for pretty much every brand out there. The time that I started, the only watches that were selling on our list was the Rolex Daytona, right? Everything else you can easily go out, get at a discount, and deliver to your client, which is why when we first started, my website had nothing but stock photos of everything that I can go out to a dozen of dealers and grab it. That formula is no more. A there's not as many ADs. B, we're in a world where ADs are not selling you anything just simply because they don't have enough supply to keep up with their own demand, and a lot of the stuff is trading over list. Audemars Piguet Royal Oak was a 10 over cost brand, An AD from AP got the watch at 45 off, would sell it to me at 39.5 off. Those days are gone, obviously, right? There's still plenty of other brands out there that, ADs will wholesale, but those are the brands that are not out there selling at outrageous, markups or over list, right? I'm not going to mention them. There's really no need. So Lange historically, for many, many years, has been that brand that sold, at a significant discount on the market, anywhere from 20 to 30% off. Now, what did that do to the secondary? That made the secondary pieces sell at 30 to 50% off. And some even worse when we're talking about, highly complicated pieces like the 𝗕𝗏𝗬𝗓, for example, that they made, which retailed for $468,000 or something like that. That's a watch that if somebody brought back on the pre-owned market back then, I'd be hard pressed to pay. I'd be paying less than $200,000.
It had massive depreciation. Also, people have to factor in at the time, Lange just wasn't that big of a name. Now,
exactly.
They weren't a household name like they are.
So now what's happening is Lange for me was always a good alternative to Patek. When people said, "Listen, I don't want to spend as much on a secondary. I want a pre-owned watch that's
well made.
That's well made, if not better. It's complicated and it looks good and it has the size." And that was when I went to Lange on a pre-owned side. And what the best part about it was, is I could always tell a client, because clients still ask, is it going to hold its value? I always told them, I said, look, within 10, 15%, you're buying a pre-owned piece that has already took the depreciation. Now, future numbers, right? We talked about the fact that the production has been decreased. We talked about the fact that they're going the boutique route. We talked about the fact that Lange is in a much bigger limelight as we speak. So I told you guys numerous times in numerous videos, and we still need to do that video. I want to go back to my old videos where I told people about certain sleepers and just to show them what the price is now versus when I said it back then. A lot of the stuff has doubled, some has tripled. And people always looked at it as a sales technique where it's just me sharing information. I'm going to do more of the same. When it comes to Lange, I've seen personally on a secondary market at least a 30 to even 40% increase in overall pricing in general, right? That's number one. And I don't see that slowing down. But this isn't going to be an overnight effect. And the reason it's going to be not an overnight effect, look at AP. That wasn't an overnight effect either. That took a few years to catch on, right? Same thing is going to happen with Lange. And what is that catch on period? That's pre-owned product being out on the secondary market, being swallowed up as the demand is going up. And the minute that secondary market gets more or less swallowed up, that's when you're going to start seeing these things trading over list, especially for some of their older models. You're going to see some most popular models, again, to start to sell over list just because there will not be availability on a secondary pre-owned market. That's going to take maybe a year, maybe two, maybe it'll take 3 years. Although at the pace our market has been changing, it'll probably take less time. Imagine yourself in a situation where you want to go out and get yourself a white gold 𝗬𝗏. Watch retails for $90,000, right? Now you're in a position where the secondary market, the demand that's been slowly rising, has now swallowed up all the secondary pieces. So you don't really have an option to buy it used. You can't get it at a boutique because you don't have a history with the boutique. And at the same token, you really, really want to watch. So what are you doing? Now you're paying over list. This is how it happens. But so long as there's Lange in a pre-owned market, there's opportunity for a collector like you to get out there, grab it before hits the fan, for lack of a better word. And I will literally tell you what I feel those sleepers are. And some of them are here. Number one, you've heard me say this numerous times, any Lange on a bracelet. Bracelet production for Lange was outsourced elsewhere. It was extremely expensive and added a significant amount of money to the MSRP price, which is why not many were made. I think Marco back there is handling the Saxonia Perpetual on the bracelet. And I have one of the original, this is an older bracelet than that. I have a Lange Platinum 1 on a bracelet.
Which Platinum Lange 1, first of all, they didn't make that many. And then second of all, to get it on a bracelet is even rare. But yeah, I think you touched on all.
Wait, there's more.
Sure.
I'm going to talk about sleepers, right? The next sleeper I'm going to talk about is, I've said this across any brands, and it works for any brand, it's the dogs, right? The pieces that are not popular. When the Cabaret Langes came out, they were not a popular watch. They were sort of around Frank Mueller, if you will, or around Richard Mille, right? Everybody wanted a Frank Mueller. There was a tonneau shape, same with Richard Mille. This was out of the norm for them. This was just another variation that they could make.
This is an OG watch that helped launch the Lange
This
brand.
launched the brand. So again, not many of these made because these are also some of the older ones. If I had to look at other sleepers, the original chronographs, i.e. your datagraphs, the first editions, are certainly going to be those sleepers. And last but not least, Grande Lange 1s, right? This was their way to compete with a market that was going bigger is better. And again, for every 10 Lange ones, maybe even more. And again, I'm guesstimating, this isn't a fact. I think they made maybe one of the grand Lange ones, especially this is also platinum, so it's another one to look for. Anything platinum from Lange, the difference in retail price was so significant. It was like, it was at least if a rose or white gold metal piece was $30,000, the platinum counterpart was at least 40, maybe a little more. It was at least a 25 to 30% difference. And again, they made less of them because of that very factor, and those are going to be your future collectibles as far as I see it.
Yeah, I think you hit on so many important points. First of all, when we're talking about supply on the secondary market, you see a table full of Langes because we can't get enough of them. One, because they're exceptionally well-made watches, but two, it's excruciatingly difficult even for us who have thousands of wholesale contacts to get something like this at an affordable or reasonable price, right? So the fact that we have even just a table of Lange watches like this is exceptional in its own right. But again, I can't stress this enough that the supply of Lange watches is one, shoring up, and then two, the prices are going up too. This is not a watch that's going to trade with huge volatility, right? It's not going to be your Royal Oak, it's not going to be your Nautilus. It's going to be that steady,
it's going to be that steady climb as you saw.
No doubt about it.
One last thing I wanted to add is, well, how do you know that the brand has made it, right? Is when you start looking at its higher end product that's 200,000 up, let's say 150,000 up in retail. When you start seeing those trading at list on a secondary O over, that's how you know the brand has made it, much like Richard Mille, right?
Yeah.
You look
or over list in the case of the Odysseus, right?
Exactly. But Odysseus is really not.
Yeah, that's
it's not a good example.
It's the exception,
I'm talking about things like the triple split. I'm talking about things like their Tourbillon perpetuals. I'm talking about things that are upwards of that are $200,000 and up. Those watches, if somebody came to me and said, listen, the boutique offered me a Tourbillon perpetual that lists for $267,000. Should I buy it? I would tell them no, look for it in the secondary now. The day that I tell them no, go ahead and buy it at list, that's how you know the brand has made it. And they're going to continue making complicated watches. They're going to continue wowing us with complications that other big boys have not made because at this point, they hook the fish.
Yeah,
right.
No doubt.
And right now, and to put it in layman's terms, they cast the reel, they hook the fish, and right now they're reeling in the fish. And when that fish is reeled in completely is when you're going to say, oh, wow, Roman told me to buy that watch for 20 grand. A year ago, I probably should have done that because it's now 30, 40, 50,
Yeah,
60.
no doubt. I mean, we talk about trading over lists in the Odysseus, but we didn't even touch on, any of the honey gold pieces, any of the lumens that, I mean, first of all, go find those, and then second of all, you're definitely paying an arm.
By the way, second best to a lumen is the luminous, right?
Yeah,
so they made
doubt.
a Grand Lange 1 and a luminous dials where the marker is the luminous. It doesn't have sort of that translucent look of the lumens, which are basically seeing the whole thing glows in the dark, but this is probably a close second, and this is still trading under 30 grand.
Yeah.
How long until this goes into the 50s and the 60s? It's not going to take that long. But there's so much more to talk about Lange, but the idea is we feel that this is a brand that's here to stay. I think we feel that this is a brand that's on the rise. But most importantly, again, it's never about the money with us. It's about what you get for the money, because some of these pieces are still trading around the same price as some of the stainless steel Rolexes, which I think is a shame. No pun for Rolex, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of value out there from a brand that's here to stay, from a brand that makes high quality watches, from a brand that makes innovative complications, which is something as of late you don't really find unless you go into the world of independence.
Yeah, pretty much. Again, I can't stress this enough. I think they target the same kind of niche demographic, but when you talk about ingenuity, high horology on a budget, it really doesn't get much better than A.Lange Sohne.
From the lineup here, pick one.
Man, this is a tough one. I mean, I think it's a tie between two watches. For one, I would go platinum Lange 1 on a bracelet, and then second would be the platinum original datograph, both of which I think are two of the most important watches Lange ever made.
And for me, I'm going to go the same route. I'm going to go the datograph, and again, platinum or rose is really irrelevant. I mean, platinum is a little rarer, so I'd probably go that route, although the rose is just so pretty. But by the way, Lange is the only one, like I always prefer rose watches with black dials, but Lange gets away because of the design of the dials.
Yep.
It gets away with rose and white even better than the black dial. But I'm definitely going to datograph, either one that's on here, and I'm going to go with the Zeitwerk. And with that, guys, we want to thank you for tuning in. Would like for you to comment which watch you would choose out of the lineup we have on the table or not. As usual, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Give Marco a follow on Instagram, and we will see you on the next edition of What's on My Desk.